Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today I got a fun and interesting episode for you guys this evening because I've been talking about decompilation and recompilation projects on the channel a bunch lately, telling you that it really does feel like the future of retro gaming. And I go through all of the projects both in progress as well as the ones that are completed, talking about the overall process. And every single video I ask you to comment down below and say if you could snap your fingers and make one project be realized, which one would it be? And I would say 2 to 1 I get comments for Mario Kart 64, and somehow you willed it into existence, almost hilariously so, because as of the recording of this video 15 hours ago, the decompilation project for Mario Kart 64 hit 100% complete status on every version of the game outside of the Japanese ROM. And that means, just like Mario Party 4 that we talked about earlier this week, Mario Kart 64 has been 100% decompiled. All of the source code and everything else that you would need to rebuild the game for modern platforms is now available if you do the build on GitHub, and that is an absolutely massive undertaking. And it's wild to think that you guys talked about wanting to see 100% decomp of Mario Kart 64, and literally just like 48 hours later it was finished up. And again, it's just like we saw with Mario Party 4, even though GameCube and Nintendo 64 don't really share anything in common hardware wise, decompilations do the exact same thing. They take the actual build of the game and they decompile it back out to its original source code, and then they check it to make sure that it rebuilds on the target hardware 1-to-1 with checksums, so you know everything is done the exact same thing. Like I talked about in the Mario Party 4 video, that doesn't mean you're going to be playing this on PC next week, but it is an absolutely impressive feat, and it means that at some point in the future you're going to be playing Mario Kart 64 on new hardware. It's going to have all the graphical improvements, all the quality of life improvements, and new features you could possibly want. Maybe even if someone gets created online support so you can play online. And that is the fun thing about these projects. They don't just enhance the graphics and make it look prettier. You can do a lot of different things around the back end depending on how you actually decide to port it and what platform and toolset you use. But just imagine Mario Kart 64 in full 1080p running at 120 plus frames per second with amazing controls and all of the different quality of life improvements you get out of modern hardware. You'd have much better textures, you could replace and mod the models out if you so wished, because as we talked about with the Majora's Mask Recomp project, there are a lot of modding tools being built into these projects. Now I understand if decomp and recomp as terms get a little bit confusing, I will explain it a little bit deeper in the video, and I'll have a video on exactly what it means later on in the future. But all it means is basically undoing all of the work to get the source code back out of Mario Kart 64 and then recoding it into a modern platform, changing the code around, changing the calls to the GPU so that everything renders correctly. Just basically almost like you remade the entirety of Mario Kart 64 for a modern platform, but the basis of doing that was the entirety of the source code of the original. And unlike FPGA or emulation, you just get better performance out of it if you actually want to make improvements. FPGA is incredible for just recreating the game 1-to-1, and software emulation does have some improvements, but it can be a little bit glitchy here or there. And I love on the GitHub page, this is a speedy Mario Kart decomp brought to you by the cousin of a tame racing driver. And I'm not going to tell you who the tame racing driver is, but leave me a comment down below and we'll see if we'd be friends in real life if you know the answer to that. And you'll see here on the USA version of the game as well as the European 1.0 and 1.1, all of the decompilation has been done and it all passes the checksum test, so you know it's 100% decompiled exactly how you would need it to. And you'll see here there is a project structure as well. I will leave a link in the GitHub below if you want to read more of the notes. I try to keep the surface level, not get too technical, just give you some of the flavor of how these things work without trying to bore you too much into the very specifics of how you do these projects. But the reality is Mario Kart 64 has now been decompiled, so the next question is, how is it going to show back up as a new executable game? A lot of the code would need to be passed through. You can hook them into a renderer like RT64, which gets used for a lot of the modern recomps you see here. Because the decompilation is just step one, there's such a robust new set of tools out there, including RT64, which is a graphics renderer for you to be able to play these native ports. Because remember, the visual hardware on Nintendo 64, everything from Silicon Graphics, is not going to operate the same way as a modern GPU like an NVIDIA or AMD one would. So you need to deal with all of the calls and hook everything in so that it can render on a modern platform platform that is completely different than a Nintendo 64 hardware. That's why when you see stuff like Majora's Mask, the Recomp project here, everything just looks spectacular. It's rendering on a modern GPU, and it's using all of those modern calls to the hardware, whether you're in Vulkan or DirectX or anything else. It just works. That is a lot of the work that goes into these things. It isn't just putting it into a compiler and hitting compile for Windows, and then having a game actually come out the back end. And soon I will have videos on some more projects that are getting recomps made right now in different stages of progress. Maybe you'll see them next month, maybe you'll see them at the end of the year, but recomps are going to be huge moving forward, and the decomps are the first stage in doing something like that. While there is more than one way to recompile a project, decompilation means that you know you have 100% of everything you need. If you hook it into RT64, you're going to have a lot of additional overhead to be able to do things. You'll see here it's built around the Direct3D 12 as well as Vulkan APIs, and Vulkan's been very popular recently. You have different shaders, and you have so many other options as far as what you can do, and you see some stuff like that as well in the recomp of Goemon. This game is absolutely outstanding. If you've never played it on the Nintendo 64, I definitely recommend checking out. It was actually one of the first projects that was recompiled on Nintendo 64 that I talked about on the channel, and it kind of kicked off, at least for me, the absolute interest in all of these decomp and recomps. And right now it seems like there's just so many projects working for Nintendo 64, and that is in part down to the robust tool set that developers have made to be able to handle all of these things, because again, you need the tools to get the job done. That way when you try to do a new decompilation, you're not starting from scratch every single time. But you do need to remember that every single game on Nintendo 64 can use the hardware in different ways, can have different calls to the hardware. We saw that on the Mr. FPGA side of things, where you'd have some games looking 100% graphically correct and other ones would have glitches, and that's just because sometimes the FPGA code was either incorrect to that certain call to the hardware or was completely missing because it wasn't finished yet. So just remember, every single Nintendo 64 game does not utilize every single function of Nintendo 64. Some games utilize almost all of them, some basically use 50% of them. It is on a case-by-case basis, just like all of these decomps and recomps are going to be. And as far as RT64, they're even talking about ray tracing, which would be so much fun to actually see in Nintendo 64, just getting some better lighting in there. Basically, the sky is the limit when it comes to decomps and recomps. So we've seen some previews, and I showed them to you, of GoldenEye being recompiled for modern platforms, going from something like Nintendo 64 to seeing it like this, even in a preview state. Absolutely stunning, and honestly, this is the generation that I think is really going to benefit from stuff like this. The PlayStation 1, the Sega Saturn, the Nintendo 64 era, where even if you have nostalgia for the actual hardware and games, you have to admit that GoldenEye can absolutely chug frame rate wise, and going back and playing the original can be a little bit of a rough experience. Even if I love this game and I still love playing it in widescreen at 120 frames per second with graphical upgrades and still having it be the Nintendo 64 game we all know, love, and remember would just 100% do it for me, and I think pretty much everyone else out there. So it's going to be exciting to see how all these things work moving forward. But I think it's absolutely hilarious in the best way possible. So many of the comments on these videos were basically people saying that they wanted to see Mario Kart 64 in a recompiled version. Now again, I can't stress enough, decompilation is only 50% of the job. You have to get that source code out and everything else, that way you can start rebuilding it. So this is one of those things. Maybe there's already a project in process that we just don't know about that's been working on a partially decompiled build. Maybe someone's going to start tomorrow. Maybe it'll take 6 months for somebody to actually pick this thing up. There are no guarantees out there, but half of the work has been done, and we're going to see a lot more decomps and recomps moving forward, because for some reason 2025 just seems to be the breakout year for this kind of concept. We've seen so many improvements in software emulation, we've seen so many improvements in FPGA cores, and now we're seeing more improvements and more projects in the decomp and recomp space as well. And I know everyone is excited about these things, because trust me, playing something like Majora's Mask in widescreen at 120 frames per second just 100% does it for me. Or Mystical Ninja starring Goemon as a recomp, 100% a better way to play in my opinion than real Nintendo 64 hardware. And don't get me wrong, I own a lot of hardware, I own a lot of FPGA devices, and I own a very big Nintendo 64 cart collection, so I love the original stuff, but I also love these recomps. And again, this is the type of thing that's going to keep these games alive in modern audiences' eyes. My nephews absolutely love playing Mario Kart on the Switch, but if I put Mario Kart 64 on, they're just going to walk away from it because they're going to say it looks too old and it's not fun. But if we have a recompiled version of the game in the future, I think they'd have a a lot more fun with it because it would just look more modern. And that is how, again, we keep video games preserved, not just for us because we're not getting any younger, but for generations to come. And it's just, again, funny that we talked about this last week, maybe earlier in this week, and everyone's talking about Mario Kart, Mario Kart, Mario Kart. And today that project has hit the 100% decompiled status. The timing is absolutely epic in the best ways possible. It always makes me laugh when things time up as perfectly as this. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me what other game would you love to see finished up as of tomorrow. Maybe it'll happen. See you guys next time. Bye bye.